From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good afternoon, everyone. Well, that's nice. Usually people don't respond back. It just sort of goes into the ether and kind of stays there. I am Carolyn Brown. I direct the Office of Scholarly Programs and the John W. Kluge Center here at the Library of Congress. And it gives me great pleasure, and I can say without exaggeration, delight, to welcome you here for this very, very special presentation by His Eminence Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, Distinguished Visiting Scholar at the Kluge Center, who will be speaking on the Amman Message, a Magisterium for Islam. This is a question. But before we begin, let me ask you if you have a cell phone or other electronic device, if you would please turn it off so it doesn't interfere with the speaker or with the recording. This afternoon's program is presented here at the John W. Kluge Center at the Library of Congress. If you don't know about the center, I should tell you it was founded in the year 2000 by a very generous endowment from John W. Kluge, who wanted to create a scholarly venue on Capitol Hill where the world of ideas and the world of affairs could come together, where the thinkers and the doers might have opportunities for informal conversation. And for that purpose, we invite some of the world's most senior scholars and thinkers. In addition, we have many of the world's most promising, rising younger scholars who join us and all come together for a wonderful intellectual community. I think, as you know, the synergism of minds and people talking together is really greater than any of the single voices by themselves, and so we seek to create that kind of atmosphere. All of our senior scholars and our postdoctoral fellows also give public presentations, and so you'll see that the center has a number of lectures and small conferences and other kinds of events. You can get information about these by going to just go to the library's homepage, and on the right-hand side, look for the Kluge Center, and you can sign up for additional information. But of course today we're here for a different purpose, a special purpose. I'm sure most of you know, but in case you don't, that Cardinal McCarrick is Archbishop Emeritus of Washington, D.C. He was trained as a sociologist, having a PhD in sociology from the Catholic University of America. And after serving in several capacities, became president of the Catholic University of Puerto Rico. Just to recite a few things, he's been auxiliary bishop of New York, bishop of Metuchen, New Jersey, archbishop of Newark, installed as Archbishop of Washington in January 2001, and 7 weeks later elevated to the College of Cardinals. He's probably most well known, though, for his work on international human rights and religious freedom. He's traveled all over the world on diplomatic missions. He has worked tirelessly in helping the poor and disenfranchised. He and I have many conversations about his work with Catholic relief missions. All over the world, he's traveled and stood for justice, promoted peace, and worked tirelessly for an interfaith dialogue. He's supposed to be retired. And if you know anything about him, you'll know that the one thing he's really bad at is retirement. And I can testify to that. Because during his time at the Kluge Center, by prior arrangement, he stepped away, I guess on average, maybe about a week, a month, to keep his other activities going, flying all over the globe on his really tireless missions in interfaith dialogue, especially with the Holy Land and the Middle East. Most recently, many of you may know this or may not, he was one of a very, very small delegation that traveled to Iran and was instrumental in the release of the last two American hikers. I could also speak about the gifts of spirit that he's brought to the Kluge Center. Even though we're an intellectual organization, we do take note of spirit. But you didn't really come to hear me. You came to hear the Cardinal, and so I'm going to step aside and ask him to speak with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brown. I'm so pleased that the community that I live with is here. They are really only here for the reception afterwards. They come, they didn't have lunch today, so I gave them only one instruction, that is not to snore during my talk. But that doesn't apply to you. You may snore. It's perfectly all right. I'm really delighted to give this lecture. Let me go right into it, though, and then we can talk later on at the question period. I want to start by saying how grateful I am for that very nice introduction that Dr. Brown gave me. I don't deserve all the nice things she said. And I'm really embarrassed and a little bit pleased by the extraordinary amount of publicity I've received from the library about this talk, or just generally in the last few months. Not only did I have this huge photo on the front page of the Gazette, but I noted the other day my profile is on the November calendar. I've never been on a calendar before. And I hope it doesn't turn anybody away from the more interesting program of talks that are going on and which the calendar is presenting to us. I'm not sure whether this talk of mine will be one of those interesting reports, but I will do my best and be grateful for your patience. If I may just add another note, or one of two notes or three, indeed this is a confession. I'm not really a scholar. I have been living a long life of different kinds of activity, once in a while by some remarkable flair of chance, including a couple of instances of scholarship. But basically, I'm a tinker or a carpenter of facts and figures, and or perhaps a merchant who strives to bring those facts and figures to other people. So I have to confess that I'm out of my depth with all these great people here, and I'm like a fish out of water, or like the story of the little boy who his father found in the apartment one day, very anxiously and energetically drawing something. And the father looked at him and he said, "Oh, Johnny, that's wonderful that you're drawing. What are you drawing?" And the little boy looked at him and he said, "I'm drawing a picture of God." And the father said, "Oh, that's very interesting, but you know, we've never seen God. Nobody knows what God looks like." And the little boy said, "Well, they will when I'm finished." And I hope something of the Amman Message will be able to get through, and you might say, we will when you're finished, or at least get some idea of it. I am so honored to be able to talk about this very fascinating and important world of Islam, which numbers, as you know, about 1.5 billion of our brothers and sisters in this planet. About 8 or 9 years ago, when they began working on the Amman Message, His Royal Highness Prince Ghazi bin Mohammed of Jordan, who is really one of the major authors of the Amman Message, pointed out so often that almost half of humanity belongs either to Christianity or to Islam, and therefore the need for them to get together to an understanding of who they are in themselves and who they are with relation to each other is really an essential element in the striving for peace and even for survival in our global society. I want to begin by acknowledging that I have been really overwhelmed by the library's remarkable gathering of resources on the theme of Islam and the Middle East, and the historical, philosophical, theological, and all the learning-related facets of this extraordinary part of the world. Of course, Islam and Christianity both extend far beyond the Middle East, although my thrust to a great extent has been centered around the ancient city of Amman, which was the first Philadelphia, and the message that came from that capital city in the first decade of this new third millennium. But before I talk about the Amman Message, may I offer my truly sincere thanks to my superiors and my colleagues here in the Kluge Center. They've been so extraordinarily generous to me in their time, in their wisdom, in their kindness to me over this past year. I am totally overwhelmed by the amazing treasure of resources I've relied on so heavily in the Middle Eastern division of the library's splendid staff. And I need to thank most sincerely Dr. Mary Jane Deeb, who not only was a friendly counselor to me, but also made it very possible for her associates to give me a large amount of time and an extraordinary amount of wisdom. I want to thank, therefore, Dr. Chris Murphy and Dr. Mohammed Salfi for their constant help and great guidance. If I have taken a path that leads to nowhere, it is certainly not their fault. It's just that sometimes 81-year-olds are not always, I don't want to say awake, but able to absorb all the rather extensive and extraordinary learning that they offer me. In a special way, I want to thank the leaders of the Office of Scholarly Research, and in a special way to our brilliant chief, Dr. Carolyn Brown, who we just heard, and to our wise counselor, Mary Lou Recker, and all those who have been so extraordinarily helpful to me, even putting up with my lack of electronic aptitude, as well as my inadequate resources of cerebral gray matter. But I am most grateful. I want to add also to the whole list, we have such wonderful people working here, to Joanne and Yvonne, and to Evelyn, and to Denise and Sally, and to Alicia, and so many others, and also to Corinthia and Tom, who keep my office looking so wonderfully. And so I think all of them have been so very great to me. They've not only been good friends and good guides, but have made this time of study for non-scholastic a very pleasant one. And finally, I'm grateful to the other scholars, or I should say to the really authentic scholars of the Kluge Center, as well as, and I'm so happy that Carolyn mentioned them, as well as to the splendid gathering of fellows, those sparkling young people in whose brilliance I see a great future for learning in our society. Some of you were kind enough, when they knew I was speaking today, to ask about if I would talk about my recent journey to Iran and the return of the two young American hikers. May I leave that to a question period if there is some interest in pursuing it? The only point I'd like to make is to insist on what I believe is very important. It is the continuing viability of the religious channel in American diplomacy, American foreign policy. Sometimes we forget that, and we find about everything else that's going on in another country, except where they are as far as their religion goes. And as we have come to learn, certainly in the last decade, the vital importance of religion in every facet of society in the nations that we deal with. And so I just would like to say that. We can talk about it later if you have questions. To a certain extent, I think for a non-Muslim, to speak about something which is so important in the life of Islam requires, I think, a certain chutzpah. And I feel a certain uneasiness that I, as a Christian, presume to dwell on a subject of such great moment to my brothers and sisters who belong to the Ummah, the nation of Islam. May it be enough that I approach this subject with care and attention as well as with affection. I will take refuge in the 6th surah of the Holy Quran, where in the 82nd verse we read, "Nearest among them in love to the believers, you will find those who say we are Christians, because among them are men devoted to learning and men who have renounced the world, and they are not arrogant." May I happily, please God, fall into that category. The specific occasion that brought me to the study of the Amman Message was a reaction to several tragedies involving Christians at the hands of very radical fundamentalist groups who self-identify themselves as true followers of Islam and as devout Muslims. A couple of these sad events were massacres in several Christian churches, both in Iraq and in Egypt, as well as the murders of some Christians and Muslims in Pakistan, men who had raised their voices to challenge certain legislation, such as the blasphemy laws of that country. After the death of these very brave individuals, Muslim leaders in different communities of the world, many of whom I had come to know and appreciate, spoke out courageously and quickly to denounce this religious terrorism in very strong words. I'm sure that every person of goodwill respects and is grateful for their valiant voices. And yet, at the same time, one read of statements or even sermons preached in mosques where the perpetrators of these crimes were lionized and heralded as true Muslims and true followers of Islam. As I listened to and read all these stories, it became clear to me that Islam did not have a central religious teaching authority which could speak in a strong and united voice against the voices of hatred and counter in a more authoritative way those who were praising and taking pride in criminals who were trying to clothe themselves in a cloak of orthodoxy. Recalling that in our Catholic community we have what is called a Magisterium, I began to wonder if there would be anything like that similar in Islam. Let me talk for a minute about the Magisterium, because I think some of you have never heard of a Magisterium just as well. Catholics define Magisterium very precisely. The Catholic Church defines its teaching on this subject, and I quote from an authoritative source. Magisterium is the authority to teach in the name of the Lord the truths of the Christian faith and all that is necessary and useful for the proclamation and defense of those truths. For us who are Catholics, this teaching authority is vested in the College of Bishops under the leadership of the Pope, because he is, as we say, the concrete center of unity and the head of the whole episcopate. Of course, this is a Catholic and not basically a Christian magisterium, since it is obvious that our Protestant brothers and sisters, as well as millions of Orthodox Christians, would not accept this definition. Some of the churches would accept a number of the Catholic Church's teaching, but not accept others. It is therefore mainly a Roman Catholic Church and a Roman Catholic concept which defines and brings into active life this specific concept of magisterium in its teaching and in its practice. I sought in vain for a Muslim magisterium. Certainly one did exist in the days of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and perhaps in the days of the caliphs. For many centuries, however, this has not been true of Islam, certainly since the death of the Caliph Ali, and since the division in Muslim between the Sunnis and the Shiites. There are probably 80% of Islam is Sunni, but there are vast numbers of Shiite Muslims in many parts of the world who, while they do accept the basic principles of Islam, have some other teachings as well. So it is not we Christians alone who regret this lack of a central authority, because although we Catholics have it, Christians do not have it. But even, as I say, when I found this, I realized that we did not have an opposite number in the halls of Islam, but we are not alone to feel this lack. Prince Ghazi, whom I mentioned earlier, probably the major author of the Amman Message, himself writes in his explanation of the importance of that document, the Amman Message, as follows: Islam has no central authority or church. It has been held together over the centuries and generations across geographic, juridical, and intellectual diversity by texts and by established authoritative interpretations of these texts, along with the Holy Quran itself. End of quote. This interpretation of these texts, the Prince goes on, and a misunderstanding of the methodologies of their interpretation. These are the words of a major Muslim teacher. Misunderstanding of the methodologies of their interpretation can have very dangerous consequences and can lead to an entirely different civilization from that of traditional Orthodox Islam. End of quote. So my concerns, I found in a certain sense to be echoed by the concerns of this very prominent Muslim leader. And as I moved more into the study of the Amman Message and the situation in Islam today, I think there are many who would say we need some sort of a magisterium. And I think that was maybe ultimately the cause of them moving into the Amman Message, which in a certain sense, a limited sense, you know the limit of the comparison, but in a certain sense is like a Muslim magisterium. I would not say that if I were preaching in a Muslim mosque, but I would say it here, because I don't think it would be offensive, because I think even though the word magisterium might not be something that they would look for as a guidance, yet the possibility of having something which they could call on and which they could depend on would, for many in Islam today, I believe, and from what I have studied, would be a bit of a blessing. Now, you will find as we talk about the Amman Message that it does present an authentic Islam, but it presents an authentic Islam which is pluralist. Not like in the Catholic Church, we are not a pluralist church, and even in Christianity, although there are many things where we are all together, we would not have the kind of pluralism that we find in Islam today. I think I'm not finished my study. I have 6 weeks more, and by that time I'll find out exactly what I need to say. But Carolyn will give me some guidance in that, and it'll all work out. Now, I want to say that there are many views on this subject, and I wanted to say what Dr. John Esposito said. Dr. Esposito is probably the leading American Islamicist, at least at our time. Teaches at Georgetown, and has been helpful to me along the way of trying to learn more about the Amman Message. In his book, The Future of Islam, he writes, quote, "A common charge is that the fight against Muslim extremism and terrorism is affected by the Islamist lack of a central religious authority. Muftis can render different opinions in fatwas, involving both personal and public life, involving business contracts or obligations of marriage and divorce, as well as in fighting and warfare. So it is possible for a mufti, who would be like a church pastor, to issue a statement that would carry with it a certain amount of importance for his parish. The man in the next parish, the man in the next mosque, may have not a totally different, but an appreciably different guidance, and may issue a fatwa that for his people would be very different than the other one. Moderate religious leaders can counter the fatwas of those who support extremists, but fatwas on both sides may still be considered valid by their followers. Thus, this source of healthy diversity and flexibility in Islam can have a dangerous downside. The war of fatwas is reflected in diverse and conflicting rulings about suicide bombing and sharp differences between mainstream senior religious leaders. That is, for example, in Iraq, the differences of opinion between the Grand Ayatollah Ali Sistani, who is one of the major voices of Islam, certainly of Shiite Islam, and militants like Muqtada al-Sadr, and in the rulings of recent Grand Muftis in Saudi Arabia, even though it is the home of Wahhabi Islam, condemning violence and terrorism versus the views of many of the actors of Al-Qaeda who came from that whole area. So there is maybe a beauty in the pluralism that Islam finds, but there is always a danger, because if you have no one to say this you cannot do, then you do it. So we will talk about this as we go along. Suddenly, or perhaps not quite suddenly, as I continued my research, I came across this document that was not widely known in the United States, and even now it seems, even in many parts of the world, and maybe less known in the United States. Perhaps after this talk it'll be even less known in the United States, but anyway. The Amman Message was drafted and published by the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. There is a special amount of prestige that in the religious life that gives them, because the Hashemites are direct descendants of the Prophet Muhammad. And so they are, well, you say the black hats, as you know, when the Islamic leaders gather, the one who wears the black turban is one who is a descendant of Muhammad. The others who wear the white turbans are not. So there's always a special reverence for a teacher who can say that he is a descendant of Muhammad. So it was drafted and published by King Abdullah, who is a black hat. And counting on the extraordinary learning of many of the teachers of Jordan, which in the last many years had gathered an appreciable and impressive amount of theological and historical information in a number of their centers, the Al-Bayt Center and other centers of Islam in Jordan have been very important in guiding the teaching of Islam in that part of the world. Well, he counted, obviously, on the help of those who he had gathered around him. And he, in a very special way, watching the signs of the times, began to realize that the Islam of today truly needed a document that might bring together at least the most essential elements of Islam, the teachings of the Quran and the Hadith of the Prophet Muhammad. King Abdullah's motivation was based on many factors. There were some voices in the modern world of Islam who felt that a moment had been reached when the concerns of the modern world and the teachings at the core of Islam needed to be presented and promulgated in a way that would prevent this major world religion from falling into the hands of teachers who were not faithful to the basic documents on which the teaching of Islam was based. Because of some of the work that I've been able to do in Central Asia, just to see the tremendous influence of Al-Qaeda, not as just a terrorist group, but as a teaching agency. And because they had access, through a good deal of money, they had access to television, they had access to the media of communications. The teaching of Al-Qaeda was sometimes much more powerful and much more prominently received than the teaching of the major figures of Islam, the Grand Muftis and the Grand Sheikhs. So I think this is one of the factors that really, I won't say frightened, but caused great concern among the major leaders of the major political leaders, as well as the major theological leaders of Islam in the Middle East. And so it is true that King Abdullah's motivation was based on many factors. There were some who, as I said, were worried about where the teaching was going. It's interesting that way back in 1979, a major scholar, Abdul Aziz Zaid, in a study published by Johns Hopkins University back in 1979, already looked at this historic period with some concern. He writes, quote, "Islamic states are attempting to telescope the achievements of the Industrial Revolution into one generation." This is a fascinating thing. You could do I say to our fellows up on the top floor, you could do all kinds of wonderful studies on this. The achievements of the Industrial Revolution into one generation. This is a period of maximum transition in the Islamic world. Now, he's talking about 40 years ago, but he looks at it and says this is a period of maximum transition in the Islamic world, in contrast to the two previous 100 years, the 200 years previous, when it remained much outside, the Islamic world remained much outside the political forces operating in the West. And because of that, remained also outside the commercial development and in a way, the intellectual, certainly the material development of the economies of the West. So Islam found itself for 200 years basically outside of this, and in an Ottoman Empire that by this time was falling apart. And we saw that in the Balkans, we saw it in other countries. So I think it is this Said writing 40 years ago, yet has an insight for us, which is very important. The present experience of the Islamic world, now this is present for him 40 years ago, with Western cultural supremacy, complicates the task of transition. Now, maybe the 40 years have changed that. Maybe there is no longer Western cultural supremacy to the same degree as it was 40 years ago. 40 years ago, China was not a cultural factor. It is today. And Iran was not a cultural factor. It is today. So that the world has changed. However, I think his statement has still great accuracy. The present experience of the Islamic world with Western cultural supremacy complicates the task of transition. The transition from being a backwater, which would be the last 200 years of Islam, into the modern Islam that maybe broke out into the Arab Spring last year. Western attitudes of cultural superiority, which was still very strong, reinforce an alien system of cultural values, the Western system, an alien system of cultural values, and thus accelerate the displacement of already weakened Islamic cultural norms. This is an interesting consideration, because Islam in those days was weakened by many factors, and colonialism had just about broken up. If I may, I found this just last week, and I want to. This is not always accepted by all of Islam, by all the scholars, Said's position. This is a quotation from another scholar who is more political, Mahmoud Munshipur. He writes, "The assumption that Muslim countries will inexorably grow more secular as they are exposed to Western notions of rationality." And this is sort of indicated or adumbrated by what Said is saying to us, that has proved unfounded. The secularization process has failed to deepen in the Muslim world and, in fact, has instead contributed to the resurgence of Islam. He's writing within the last decade, so he has a different perspective. Another 30 years have changed. While a small group of leaders has adopted a Western secular worldview, the vast majority of Muslims has not embraced a secular perspective. Whereas in Europe, we who are religious people know the secularization of Europe has gone so fast and has really made an impact on religious life in Europe, certainly, on philosophical life as well. In the Muslim world, this secularism is often viewed as an externally posed agenda emblematic of European strategic interests. While in the Muslim world, secularization preceded religious reformation, in the European case, it resulted more and more from such reformation. The modernizing experiences of many Middle Eastern cities, this is fascinating as a sociologist, I find this fascinating. The modernizing experiences of many Middle Eastern cities were typified by urban sprawl, detailing socio-cultural fabric, high unemployment rates, poverty, poor services, frustrated expectations, economic failures of assorted kinds, undermined modernizing secular states, and culminated in the emergence of a countervailing force in Muslim society, Islamic revivalism. Now, isn't that a description of the Arab Spring? And he's writing about 6-7 years before the Arab Spring. And he's finding it in the not destruction of secularism, but in the weakening and in the ability of the people to see there is no real agenda in secularism that will help the poor. And I think he's seeing that, and this last sentence is powerful. The battle for culture was being fought in the Islamic countries, was being fought in the homes, the streets, the shops, the mosques, and the workplaces of the Islamic world. And it was on these battlefields that Islam was at its most powerful. So no, he would not be of the same mind as Said, but he's talking 35 years later, and he's looking at a world that has changed very much in those 35 years. He's talking about a world that politically has seen the both isolation and strengthening of Iran, that has seen the Holy Land situation draw on closer and closer, perhaps, hopefully not, to a third intifada, but the frustration level that he sees, that he talks of going on in Muslim areas, which probably gives rise to the Arab Spring, is present everywhere. And the westernization, in a certain sense, of Islam, it now takes a back seat, because it is not powerful enough to move out of the situation. So, this is the situation that the leadership of many of the countries of Islam faced. Some of their teachers had not yet emerged from the colonial period and still had the understanding and the understandable anger within them at those years when Islam was not respected by the colonial powers. Others had moved on, hopefully most of them into an understanding of the world of the third millennium, but others being driven not just by the memories of colonialism, but by the perceived and actual injustices in today's world. Forced, driven to take up arms in the name of Islam against those who would wield unfair advantage over the Muslim peoples, in some case because they represented the Western powers, or by governments in the Muslim world, which, according to this group, were really just puppets of powerful non-Muslim states. It was in this world that King Abdullah and his advisors sought to understand and sought at the same time to find a way in which the disparate strands of Islam could be pulled together and play its authentic role as a great religion throughout the world. Once again, in the introduction of the Amman Message, the leaders wrote, "Islam today as a religion faces many challenges and many problems. Perhaps one of the greatest of these is misunderstanding and confusion about the true nature of the religion of Islam among Muslims and non-Muslims alike. This misunderstanding has led to erroneous interpretation of Islamic texts and thus illegitimate religious edicts by people who are intellectually and morally unqualified to make religious edicts. Therefore, after months of discussion and meetings, a committee named by King Abdullah and including one Christian who, in a determined effort to produce a document that the Christians would understand, they issued the Amman Message. It was November 2004 of our era. And it described, quote, what Islam is and what Islam is not, and what actions represent it and what actions do not. Its goal, and this is very beautiful, was to clarify to the modern world the true nature of Islam and the nature of true Islam. In the interest of time, I'll read just a short preamble to this. Quote, in order to give this statement more religious authority, King Abdullah sent the following 3 questions to 24 of the most senior religious scholars from all over the world, representing all the branches and all the schools of Islam. The 3 questions were, who is a Muslim? Is it permissible to call someone an apostate? And who has the right to undertake issuing fatwas or legal rulings? Based on the fatwas provided by these great scholars, because they came back with rulings after he asked those 3 questions, based on the fatwas provided by them, who included the Grand Sheikh al-Khazar of Tantawi, who just died, a great loss for us, the Grand Ayatollah Sistani from Iraq, and Sheikh Karawadi from Oman, who was recognized as one of the major voices. In July 2005, after having done all this preliminary work, King Abdullah convened an international Islamic conference of 200 of the world's leading Islamic scholars from 50 countries, and they issued a ruling, a fatwa, on these 3 issues. The Amman Message, therefore, has just 3 questions and 3 answers. To answer the question, who is a Muslim, they indicated the following. The scholars specifically recognize the validity of all 8 legal schools of Sunni, Shia, and Ibadi Islam, and all of the traditional Islamic theology, of Islamic mysticism or Sufism, and a true, this is important because it's true Salafi thought, and came to a precise definition of who is a Muslim. I say true Salafi thought because we've found now in Egypt, the Salafis seem to be moving more and more into the fundamentalist camp. But Salafi basically means faithful to the Quran, faithful to the original teaching of Muhammad. This is one of the weaknesses of the document because it is a pluralistic document. It does not say everybody has to do this, everybody has to do that. That's one of its strengths. You wouldn't get it through if you didn't do that. But it's also one of its weaknesses because it doesn't finally decide what Islam is and who can speak for Islam. And secondly, based on this definition, they forbid takfir, or the declarations of apostasy. You have to realize some of the leaders of the nations were afraid they're going to be named by these extreme groups, they were going to be called apostates. And according to the old practice, an apostate could be killed, because he would be a traitor to the ummah, to the nation. And so to prevent them being called apostate, takfir, it was important that they tried to escape this, and that they tried to make sure who can be called takfir. And then, based on all the religious schools and their teaching, they set forth the subjective and objective precondition for the issuing of fatwas, thereby exposing ignorant and illegitimate edicts in the name of Islam. The Amman Message, in the Amman Message, the authors describe the principles of Islam, because this is part of the definition. Obviously, this is the basis of the definition of who is a true Muslim. The true definition of Muslim is as follows: is one who is faithful to Islam. Islam is founded on these basic principles: attesting to the unity of God and belief in the message of his prophet. There is no God, but Muhammad is prophet. This constant refrain is the faith of Islam. That's number one. You have to have that faith and have that willingness to live it. 2, continuous connection with the Creator through ritual prayer. We've all seen it. We've traveled in Muslim countries. We've all seen this most impressive time when all the men are down on their knees at once and joined in this prayer. Most impressive. And 3rd, the training and rectifying the soul through the fast of Ramadan. Every year this fast comes along, and its purpose is to bring you back to where you should have been before. You know, stop going through luxury, stop eating all the things, stop doing the things you shouldn't be doing. Go back. Take that month and renew yourself every year. And then one which is very important, which I've seen going through Muslim life, safeguarding one another by paying the zakat, the charity tax. And the poorest in Islam must pay this. You know, we say in Christianity, we say the tithe, but you know, very few people pay the tithe. But the zakat is a very strong tax, and I've seen it collected, and I've seen it supporting old people's homes and the poor and feeding them because of the zakat. And then 5, for those who can, the Hajj, the annual pilgrimage. So those are the 5 things: the profession of faith, there is no God but God, Muhammad is prophet; the 5 prayers a day; the fast of Ramadan; the zakat of charity; and the Hajj when it is possible. So these 3 points were then unanimously adopted by the Islamic world's political and temporal leadership. See, there's always been this close relationship in Islam between church and state. And there was a meeting of the Organization of the Islamic Conferences, which is the top organization of Islam. It met in December 2005, and they unanimously adopted the Amman Message. So it's going wonderfully now. It's getting more and more powerful and more important. The promoters of the Islam Message heralded it as good news not only for Muslims, for whom it provides a basis for unity and a solution for infighting, that's quote, but also for non-Muslims. They thought that by preserving traditional Islam's internal checks and balances, it assured balanced Islamic solutions for essential issues like human rights, women's rights, freedom of religion, legitimate jihad, good citizenship of Muslims in non-Muslim countries, and just and democratic government. Now, people would take some exception to that, but that was their hope. One of the major roles of this message was to expose the illegitimate opinions of radical fundamentalists and terrorists from the point of view of true Islam. The foreign minister of Singapore, George Yeo, declared at the 60th session of the United Nations General Assembly, he spoke about this, and there's a quote, "Without this clarification of the Amman Message, the war against terrorism would be much harder to fight." I've gone long in trying to present this short but important document in its context. It was heralded by some as an instrument of consensus, or Ijma, of the Ummah of Islam in our day. It has been called a consolidation of traditional Orthodox Islam. Its significance for many is that for the first time in over 1,000 years, the Ummah, the nation, has formally and specifically come to such a pluralistic, it can't be univocal, a pluralistic mutual inter-recognition, and also that such a recognition is religiously binding on Muslims, since the Prophet has said, "My Ummah will not agree on an error." This is from the Hadith of Muhammad. So the fact that they all agreed, they say, okay, that is fine. We have in Christianity, vox populi, vox Dei. That when all the people say the same thing, then this is the voice of God. As I indicated earlier, the document was approved time and time again by organizations and international compacts. It truly was put out there for the world to see as a true example of authentic Ijma, if it is that, for the world and for the Ummah to follow. Unfortunately, its great potential was never realized. The key to the hopes of the king and his advisors was that, having received all these approvals in the international and national levels, the word would seep down into the mosques and schools of Islam throughout the world. It does not seem that this happened. My travels, I talk about the Amman Message. You have to start from the beginning. You know more about the Amman Message, more than you need to know perhaps, but you know more about it than they do in most of the Arab countries. Even in the Arab world, where it received great support from some of the leading Arab scholars and great support from governments, it never made it to the level of the imams and the mullahs in the local communities and the teachers of Islam throughout the world. I've been trying to determine why the Amman Message did not have that influence that one would have expected from the many groups that applauded and approved it. Besides the fact that it did not get into the grassroots, where obviously it would do the most good, it also entered into a world where the scholars of Islam were struggling to make sure that their teaching was appropriate as the trends revealed, as we said before. There is through Islam even now, the Amman Message does not settle the differing understandings of Islamic thought today. There is a growing, although far from predominating, reformist school of thought in Islam. The Muslim world also has a still very powerful fundamentalist group, center, voice in the world of Islam today. The problem that Islam faces, that the Amman Message faces, hinges on its Islamic character and authenticity. In the same way, there was hope that I'll just give you another interesting comment on why many in Islam feel that it has to reflect the changes in society. Tariq Ramadan, whom many of you may have heard, a major scholar, young Muslim scholar today, quoted in the 2006 edition of New Voices of Islam, says, "Faithfulness to principles cannot involve faithfulness to historic models, because times change. Societies and political and economic systems become more complex, and in every age it is in fact necessary to think of a model appropriate to each social and cultural reality." What he's saying is you have to update. Islam must update. Christianity has updated in many ways. The Second Vatican Council was an updating of Christianity. Was an opportunity to bring out of the modern day the role of the laity in Christianity and Catholicism, especially during the Second Vatican Council, came up suddenly. When I was first a priest, lay people could do almost nothing in the church. Now they are doing much more. I know some feel that we have not gone the final way with women priests. I don't think we ever will. I don't think that's possible. But all of this has been has been part of the development of the modernization, Islam has not had that to the same extent. And here are some new scholars, some young scholars saying, it is time to do that, you have to do that. So the Amman Message probably sought to be a melding of these different points of view, but in actuality, it ended up bringing more devotion to principles than to differing interpretations. This may be one of the reasons why it failed to have the extraordinary effect we all thought it would. Its strength, as well as its weakness, was that ultimately it really was nothing new. Or may it better to say, ultimately its teaching was nothing new. Another reason, and I'm closing here, another reason might be the launching of a new document called the Common Word. Shortly after the advent of the Amman Message, the Muslim world began to turn its gaze on more religious cooperation with the West, at least on the part of leaders who were tending to promote the Amman Message. Some of them are the same authors of both documents. The document of extraordinary importance because it is called the Common Word. It is important because it was written in response to comments in the West, including those by Pope Benedict when he said some words which were not pleasing to our Muslim friends. He expressed some hesitation in commending the whole nature of Islam. The Common Word has been a document which has provoked much more interest in universities and center of religious dialogue. The problem, I think, first of all, is that it came too soon before the Amman Message had a chance really to spread about. And also, if I may parenthetically remark, it may indicate that in the long run, it's easier to talk to your neighbors than to talk to your family. I think a lot of us have learned that over the years. Ultimately, of course, the question of major teachers of Islam and where they are now directing their thoughts and their official preaching in a way that is so rapidly changing. I think that I will close here. I didn't realize I had so much. I probably could take tomorrow off. I won't. After the publication of the Amman Message, after it received so many commendations throughout Islam and many parts of the world, of course there were critics who felt that it had not reached the level of Ijma or consensus. Consensus, I guess, is the closest we can get to Magisterium in the concepts of both Christianity and Islam. But most of these critics were approving of what the writers hoped to accomplish. Perhaps a good example of this is an excellent study entitled Consensus in Islam and the Amman Declaration by Drs. Jonathan Brown, who teaches over at Georgetown, and Dr. Hellier. If we recognize that the Amman Message was an effort to establish that religious authority, while pluralistic, existed within a certain set of matrices within orthodoxy, the question still remains whether the document was in fact an Ijma, a true consensus. These two authors are skeptical. They believe that it can be defined as Ijma, as consensus, only in the less absolute sense that it had an overwhelming agreement of known religious authorities. However, Drs. Brown and Hellier do admit that the claim to consensus made by the Amman Message may resonate among Muslims and can even be taken up by Western policy voices as the authentic voice of Muslim tradition in the 21st century. This is why it is still important for us to know about, important for us to understand. They go on to ask whether the Amman Message is something worthwhile to promote. And even though they have some criticism of it, they are in agreement that for those who seek peace and coexistence in the Muslim world, the answer is an easy yes. If we ask then to what extent the Amman Message successfully calls for peace and for unity and for understanding in our world today, and how effective it has been, it is probably still early yet to tell. For me, it has been a fascinating, interesting adventure and a journey into a system of belief that has perdured and grown for more than a millennium and a half. I took too long. Thank you very much. My superior said I can still take some questions. Those who are still awake. Oh, wow. Yes.
I guess I haven't really studied a lot of what you said, and I haven't studied a lot of what you're talking about. I found the comments really interesting. I learned quite a bit. You spent the time talking about the Amman Message. I'm not sure what the Magisterium represents and whether that represents something that all of Christendom is supposed to agree to. And you were specific, I think, on 5 points of the Amman Message. Are there similar 5 points that Christians are supposed to believe in by some doctrine of some body?
I don't think so. At least I haven't. I'm pretty old and I haven't come across them yet. But I think basically there is no magisterium in Christianity. We have a magisterium in Catholicism, because Catholicism, we're supposed to believe, and hopefully we do, believe the same things. But such as, say, women priests, most of the Protestant world would not accept that. The Orthodox would be with us on that. But the position of the Holy Father, the Orthodox would not be with us on that. So there is really, just as in Islam, the Sunni, who are the majority, believe one thing. The Shiites believe basically those 5 points that we mentioned, but they have other things. They believe in the coming back of the 12th Imam. They believe that Ali was really the only legitimate caliph in those days, because he could have descended by family and the others descended by vote. They would believe that they have really made that they have some ceremonies as they celebrate the death of Ali and the death of his 2 sons, Hussein and Hassan, and these are major feasts and really almost like Christmas and Easter for us, but the Sunnis have nothing like that. So that there is Islam, but what the Amman Message says, this is why we say it is a pluralistic message, because there are different grades and different ways that Islam comes together, but they come together in those 5 things. They all believe in that profession of faith, the need for prayer, the need for fasting, the need for charity, and the possibility of the Hajj. But you're right. It's a different word. It's not true. It's not a true magisterium. There are some who feel it's the ijma, and ijma means a concursus of a general equal understanding. Yes.
Given what you just spoke about, can you relate that to what you just did in Iran, like when you went, what they said, religious channels to try to get the hikers?
Okay, I can do that quickly about the Iran story. About 2 years ago, the State Department said to the mothers, because the mothers were really the great leaders in this, said to the mothers, we don't have any channel now. Why don't you try a religious channel? And they sent them to me. And so I began then 2 years ago we got another group of religious leaders. We got them all together. We sent them We tried to send them to Iran. That wasn't possible. We sent a letter from the religious leaders. It was Thanksgiving right around this time. We said, this is a family holiday. Families come home. Why don't you let them come home? 6 months later, I got an answer from the Supreme Leader, and he said, if they're guilty, they can come home. If they're not guilty, they have to suffer. Kind personal regards. Well, that didn't really answer anything we were looking for. But we kept at it. We kept at it, and I saw Ahmadinejad last year, and we spoke about a religious channel. He said you should come to Iran. It took another year before we were able to go. But our job there, and this is really the specific answer to your question, our job there was not to be political, but to talk to the religious leaders, because they were the ones who said, no, you can't do it. The political thing, the president had said, I'm going to let them go. Political leaders said, no, we're in charge. You can't let them go. We're in charge with things, with government, with prisons and things like that. We're in charge. Justice is ours. We're in charge. So our job, my job, was to persuade the religious leaders, going back to the Quran, where we say Allah, the compassionate and the merciful, to talk about the compassion of Allah. And finally, they gave in. Maybe I talked that much. So and that's why we were able to bring them home. So it was wonderful. I did not come home with them because I had to get home, and we didn't leave until we were sure that they were going to come home. And it was nice. About a week after they got home, we got a call. They wanted to see me and the two others who were with me, and so we came, and the families were there. It was really a wonderful experience. You know, you feel you can, you know, at 81 when you can do something good, you know, you gotta try. So anyway, another question. Yes.
Very interesting. My question is, and I don't want to be provocative at all, but as far as I understand, the generation of a universal magisterium for all the Muslim world would be like a way to moderate some of the most extremist aspect of Islam. My proposal, or my counter-proposal is, wouldn't be secularization another way to moderate the excess of Islam? And if it's so, don't you think that if we compare how modernization and secularization happen in Europe, it's hard to believe that it can happen in the Muslim world based on the Amman Message? It is still like a religious message. I don't know if it's clear enough.
You know, it's very clear. There are some who believe that. Some of the secularists absolutely believe that. They are sure this is the way to peace and harmony in the world. Get rid of the problems of religion. This goes back to the philosophers. We have a whole bunch of philosophers here who can tell you which philosophers said that. And it goes back to modern philosophy. So much of modern philosophy calls for that. You know, even the Marxian position is very strong in that. You know, get rid of the religion is the opium of the people. You know, religion is going to prevent people getting together. That's a philosophical possibility, they say, and there are many who believe that. I happen not to be of that school, but you know, life is like that, and I certainly, even if I were ever to become like that school, which I don't think it ever happen, I don't see Islam doing it at all. Islam is so locked into a theocratic understanding of life and of nature and of God that I think they would even be stronger in. And this one article that Municipal wrote, saying that's, you know, the secularism are not going to win in a battle with Islam. Hopefully they're not going to win in the battle with Christianity, although in Europe they're making real progress. But in Islam will be a harder nut to crack. Thanks be to God, I think. Maybe one more? Yes, please.
Your Eminence, thank you for your talk. clearly it would be up to Islam to decide if they want to have something equivalent to a magisterium that we have in the Catholic Church, the Catholic faith. But is there something that we Christians, Catholics, as people, could do to encourage the message of the Amman Message to our brothers in Islam?
I think so, and I have this saying that I've been using in interreligious dialogue for like 20 years. It's sort of gotten old now, but we often begin dialogue by talking to people. That's how we begin it. We say, I'm going to talk to you. That doesn't work. We've got to learn to talk with people. So that's the first step, is to begin to talk with people. The second is to get to understand people. The third, once you understand people and see where they're coming from, you get to appreciate people. And the fourth, you get to be able to work with people. So I think that's what interreligious dialogue has to try to do. There's not enough of it going on. In some areas, Islam is not enthusiastic about it. In other areas, Christianity is not enthusiastic about it. But I think we have to break down the walls. We are never not going to believe in, Christians are never going to not believe in the divinity of Jesus. And Muslims are probably not going to believe that Jesus is God, because they are so convinced that the unicity, this is what brings us together, the fact that we believe in one God. Now, we believe one God in three persons. We're Trinitarian. They believe only in one God. They have wonderful lines. It's simpler. It's simpler. He has no partners. God has no partners. So, but I think to understand, there's so much that comes out from understanding when in the surah that I quoted, and there are so many others, where he says, you have your religion, I have my religion, and he doesn't condemn. They feel that the people of the book, and we are our Jewish friends and the Muslims and Christians, we're all people of the book, and the Quran has great respect for the people of the book. So I think by building on that respect, we can build a better world, and that's what we have to do. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Please let us thank His Eminence, Cardinal McCarrick.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.